This has been a great introduction, and all of the lunchtime seminars are always so exciting, and it's such a welcoming environment. So I'm glad to speak today to everyone about bias and ethics in AI. So the format of this, I'll start out, I'll talk about some background, how AI impacts marginalized communities, and then move into how I teach software engineering ethics. And then I'll hand it over to Edgar, he'll talk about his experience teaching ethics as well in the context of using debates. All right, so I'll share my screen, but please feel free to interrupt me at any time if you have questions or have anything come up. All right. So just a little bit about me, just to introduce myself. My name is Korpan. I'm in the computer science department here at Hunter. I'm an assistant professor. And I'm coming to this presentation and this work from a very interdisciplinary background. I studied economics and finance in undergrad, moved on to statistics before getting to computer science. I also worked professionally for a few years, and I've taught computer science at 2 different institutions and at different levels, and also participated in a number of pedagogy workshops. And so this is kind of what has driven me to think about these issues, and hopefully we'll all get to learn a little bit something today. So let me start by talking about why is this topic important? Why should we care about bias and ethics in AI? And I'm going to walk you through a case study about the impacts of AI on marginalized communities. So just to level set, so that everyone has a similar definition of what I'm talking about, when I use the word AI, I'm talking about computer software that simulates intelligence, often based on significant amounts of data. Right, so AI is broader than just large language models, right? ChatGPT is just one small piece of the larger ecosystem of AI systems. And in this case study, I'm going to be particularly talking about how AI affects the queer community, also known as the LGBT plus community. And so what are the challenges that this community and other marginalized communities face when AI is deployed in the real world? Well, things like privacy, censorship, bias, lack of transparency, but there are also opportunities to use AI to benefit marginalized communities as well. And so what I'm going to cover in this first piece is how we can ensure AI systems reflect LGBT plus identities, and what are the ethical responsibilities for developers and institutions. So before I get into that, I want to show you an example. This is from ChatGPT, and what I wanted to see was, by changing just a word in the prompt, how would that affect the output that ChatGPT gives you? I'm sure you've all played around with this. You've all probably used ChatGPT for all sorts of different things. And so here, the prompt I gave it was, tell me a story about the day in the life of a blank Brazilian person, where I filled in the blank with different terms. So first I said, a queer Brazilian person. And I got a story about someone named Joao, a queer Brazilian living in Sao Paulo. And what I want to point out is the output of this story as it relates to this queer identifier. Right? So the first paragraph highlights how their life is one of navigating contrasts between joy and struggle. They have a rainbow flag on their balcony. They work, when it mentions their work environment, right, it talks about it's inclusive, that their colleagues are aware of their pronouns, but also remembering how they were abused on the metro. They go out with friends and they talk about the political struggles facing the LGBTQ plus community, right? The rise of homophobic and transphobic violence. They go to volunteer in an LGBTQ plus support center. They really, throughout the entire story, right, it is all about their queer identity. From their experience, even as the moment they're falling asleep, they're dreaming about queer people's experience in Brazil, right? And the fight for acceptance and equity. So really throughout this entire story, it highlights the queerness. So let's compare that to using the word straight here. A straight Brazilian person, again, it's about a person named Joao walking us through their entire day. And really, where does it highlight their sexuality? There's one instance explicitly where it says he's a regular guy, straight in his early 30s, navigating life in one of the largest cities. And you could say maybe there's one more mention. It talks about Joao meeting up with his girlfriend. That doesn't necessarily mean Joao is straight, and maybe even starting a family. But again, that isn't necessarily tied to being straight. And so you see already a sharp difference, right? When you use the word queer, everything infuses an entire story in their life of that person about being queer. When you're straight, this is very different, right? And now what if we just don't include an identifier here? And what do we get? A nice story once again. And now there's no mention about this person's sexuality or gender identity at all. And so what does this tell us, right? According to ChatGPT and this large language model, right, queer as an identifier results in a very different type of story, right, reinforcing stereotypes and possibly perpetuating harmful stereotypes that can cause more harm and violence in the real world, right? And that a straight Brazilian person is closer, right, in terms of the story that it outputs to an unidentified Brazilian person. And so what I'm going to do is walk you through some of the other challenges that we face from these AI systems, right? And I'm going to go through these quickly because I want to highlight how there are many challenges, absolutely, but there are also opportunities. And why is this important, right, to level set? Is because computer scientists alone are not going to be able to solve all these problems, right? No matter what discipline you're in, what courses you're teaching, AI is really going to be infusing every discipline. And we have to teach our students to understand how AI is going to be applied in their discipline and how we need to be aware of the possible biases that arise when it's used in that discipline. So one area, for example, is in censorship and content moderation. It's been shown over and over that social media platforms often misclassify queer content as inappropriate, while they also allow queerphobic hate to remain on the platform, right? So the example on the top right, on Instagram, censoring a photo of two gay dads holding their newborn baby, it was marked as graphic or violent, right, sensitive content. And actually, I literally saw this as I was scrolling Instagram when it happened, right? And I saw this was censored and I was like, what is happening? Why is there censoring this image, right? It was upsetting to me that this was labeled in that way, right? There's also often bias in the data and the models themselves, right? Many AI systems are built on data sets that assume a binary gender model. This can result in harmful misgendering or erasure, reinforcement of stereotypes. And you can see some examples on the left. On the top left, this is AI-generated images when it's prompted with transgender women. And what happens, right? These are hypersexualized images, or they've removed even the humanity of these, of the people that it's depicting. On the bottom right is an example with a large language model, again, using perpetuating harmful stereotypes when talking about a gay man. There's a lot of issues around privacy and surveillance, right? AI systems being used to expose or out queer individuals, right? There's an example from a Catholic group spending millions to try to surveil and identify gay priests using AI technology, or in Egypt, right, where the police were using, again, AI technology to try to find LGBT plus people on dating apps. Often these systems can also perpetuate misinformation and disinformation against marginalized peoples, right? Creating chatbots and other types of AI-generated material that furthers harassment and violence in the real world. Lastly, there is a lack of transparency and accountability, right? We have little understanding of how these systems are being made, how they're making decisions, and really how to hold them accountable, right? If there is harm, how do we have an avenue to address that harm and resolve it, right? So we need people from many different disciplines to come around and work on these topics, right? From sociologists, from legal scholars, from ethicists and philosophers, right? And also computer scientists and engineers. So what are the opportunities ahead of us, right? We want to build more inclusive AI systems so that we can help people who are marginalized with issues of housing, employment, healthcare, right? So that we can have AI systems that create content that reflects really the full spectrum of identities and experiences. And we can build AI for these communities. So for example, with the queer community, right, we can have AI systems that help queer people navigate mental health challenges, match them with affirming healthcare professionals, right? I experienced this when I was getting married. This was about 8 years ago. It was a very stressful time in my life. I wanted to find a mental health professional that would be able to help me through that time. And I was matched with a therapist. And in our first meeting, she told me, I don't know how to help you. I don't know how to deal with same-sex couples and their issues. I recommend you find someone else to help you, right? And it was a very difficult time in my life already. And to be told that by a non-affirming provider was very difficult, right? Can we design AI systems to avoid those situations, right? And build systems that support people. This can be done using approaches like participatory design, right? Bringing in the community into the design and development of the system, right? And also, right, so not only involving people in the design of the system, but also building a more diverse workforce, right? We need multiple disciplines and perspectives and backgrounds that are involved in the creation of these systems so that we can try to hopefully design a more inclusive approach. There are also a number of other suggestions I have here. And maybe won't go through all of them. I'll just highlight, right? Things like community-led bias audits. This is kind of a relatively novel thing where you have the community come in and do an audit of the AI system. Also developing explainable systems, right? Where you can understand how they're working. And so just to conclude on this first piece about impact of AI in marginalized communities, right? We want to have inclusive AI systems, and to do that, we need to have collective action and transparency. We need to involve their voices in the development, deployment, and governance of these systems, right? If we want it to be inclusive to queer people, people of color, to women, to other marginalized communities, like the Black and brown people around the world and the global South that have often been excluded from the development of these systems, right? We need to be including them in the development of these systems, right? And there's potential to really empower marginalized groups, but only when we include them, right? And we build in accountability. And so if we want to make AI systems inclusive, right, we have to commit to that. All right, so how do we start to take these things and bring them into our classrooms, right? From all the different examples that I showed you, I'm sure there must be one or two that are applicable to what you are teaching in your classrooms, regardless of the discipline. You can hopefully bring in those ideas and spark discussions within the context of your discipline. Okay, so let me move to how I teach engineering ethics, software engineering ethics to computer science students, and just talk about the context here, which is a computer science capstone course. So the capstone course is where students, it's a culminating experience of the major, the last course they have to really take before they graduate. And the idea is that they work in small groups to build a major software engineering project together. It allows them to apply all the skills they've learned, both the theoretical and applied things they've learned throughout the major, but also learn some new skills, right, that have to do with professional development. And so the capstone is this opportunity to get all of the majors, right, working on projects, but also thinking about the larger issues that have to do with the profession. So I've been teaching this for a number of years, and I thought it was very important from my personal perspective, but also I think given the way that the industry is moving, that we incorporate topics of ethics into this course so that students are thinking about how the things that they build can affect society in the real world, right? And I start from the first day of class by telling them, no matter how small of a system that you're working on, whether it's even just creating a button on a screen or adding a line of text somewhere on a web page, right? Someone is going to be interacting with it, and that means it's going to be impacting someone's life, impacting the world, impacting people around us, right? So it doesn't matter how small or how big of a system that you're creating is, you as the programmer, as the developer, have to think about the impact of what you're doing, right? You are not separated from that, right? You have the control and power in that situation. And so how do you start to teach your students this? To me, it begins by creating a culture in the classroom where we think about these issues, where we can openly talk about them, talk about how technology impacts society. And that will allow us then to have those discussions and think about these issues critically, right? So I start by setting a community agreement where we want to create an inclusive learning environment. So I'm not sure if everyone has used community agreements. Community agreement is this idea where beginning of class, you come together between you and the students to talk about what are the things that are acceptable in this classroom when we're talking to each other? What are our expectations in terms of how we behave with one another? And so here is the list. This was literally created by my students. I asked them and I wrote down exactly what they asked me to put here. I had students give feedback and modify these, but these are the things that we agreed to at the beginning of class, right? Be open to new ideas. Having questions is fine. Be mindful everyone is a different skill level. Speak to one another with respect, right? Set boundaries, recognize that we all have the same goal, but have individual challenges, and prioritize your mental and physical health, right? This is what we agreed to as a class in terms of how we'll interact with each other. So I think setting that tone from the beginning, right? This is right at the beginning. I introduce myself on the first day of class. I talk about what is the course. We go through the syllabus. And this is the very next thing after the syllabus, right? Our community agreement. Also, right, the first day of class, when I teach capstone, I also wanted to discuss even further, right? What are the societal impacts of technology, right? And really, I wanted the students to think about how their projects can really benefit their community, right? So I talked about topics like tech for good, community technology, what is responsible tech, right? What is digital justice? These are topics that allow students to start to get their head around what are possible ways of building technology and how do we frame the way we build it in a society and community-centered way. To further connect it back to their personal lives, I also asked them to reflect on their personal identity, purpose, and belonging, right? And so this was about then thinking about what are they bringing to the class? What is it about themselves, their internal motivations that are driving them to go into this field, right? Again, trying to reinforce this idea that engineering, ethics, and bias is not separate from their lives. It's not separate from the things they're creating, right? Think about their own life and what are they doing? Why are they pursuing this degree? Why do they want to become a software developer? And oftentimes, right, they come to the realization that they want to build things that improve people's lives, hopefully. And they usually also say they want to make a lot of money, right? But hopefully the impact on their community helps them to ground their motivations. I also have them go and interview community members, right? Go talk to people in the community and think about what impact the thing you want to build will have. Okay. And so what were the projects that came up because of that, right? So I had one project which was inspired by a student who saw that their grandmother was struggling to learn English. She was a Mandarin speaker, but she didn't have anyone to practice English with. And so this project was to use a chatbot as a language partner, right? And this was, again, developed out of the idea of like, what is a challenge that they face in their life, their family, their community, and how can we use technology to solve that? I'm going to skip the other projects for now. I'm happy to come back and talk about those later. Once I kind of frame the class in this way, they dive into work on their projects. And later on, I try to come back and reinforce this issue of ethics in software development. And so what I did was I started with some hypothetical questions to spark some discussion, right? We talked about these questions as a class and then as groups, right? Should the FBI be able to unlock your phone if they think you committed a crime? Is it ethical to hack a bank's emails to find out why your mortgage application was denied, right? And then lastly, as a developer of a social media app, you notice that the ads are being displayed to users is very different depending on the user's race. What should you do as a developer? And so there's no right answer to any of these questions, right? But the idea is to spark their interest and understanding that what you do as a software developer, right, has an impact on other people. I also do a lecture on software engineering ethics, right, which talks about why is there a need for professional ethics, right, drawing parallels between software engineering and other disciplines that have their own professional ethics, right, doctors, airline pilots, and so on, right? What's the difference between legality and ethics, going over ethical frameworks. There's a code of ethics within our discipline. And then finally, we go through some different ethical scenarios by applying some ethical analysis methodology. I also give my students an ethics assignment, right? So how do we assess their understanding of ethics in this context, right? Here, the assignment I gave them was to really go into the real world and look at what are the ethical things that are happening right now in the world, right? So I asked them to pick 2 articles from news articles from different publications, right? New York Times, ProPublica, The Atlantic, and can be on any of these topics, right, that intersect technology and ethics, and then ask them to read those articles, analyze them, right, and then do a personal reflection on the ethical issues related to those topics, right? They have to use the ethical frameworks we talked about related to the code of ethics, right, and talk about what would they do if they were the software developer involved in that situation. Right, and so here are some examples of the papers that students submitted, right? So the problem of bias in facial recognition software, right? The issue of fake news when used with AI, the role of AI in modern warfare. This was about the ethics of image generation, and this last one was AI and ethics, the ethics of AI and LLMs, large language models, right? But first, starting the course by having students think about their personal identities, their motivations, their community, talking about the idea of community technology, right? And how that now leads into this ethics assignment where they have to go and look at actual ethical issues that are happening now and do that personal reflection, right? It's once again tying it back all together. Lastly, they also had to look at the ethical considerations of their project, right? So again, bringing it into their big project they're working on over the course of the semester, thinking about what are the ethical implications, right? And this was some examples here, right? Right, thinking about collecting user data or how the data is being stored, right, to maintain privacy for the users. What is the accessibility issues that might come up? Is there informed consent within their app, right? How are they thinking about the way we can build more assistive technology, right? Or even can there be personal injury, right, from using the app? And this was in the context of like an app giving recommendations on posture, right? So how should we consider this, right? How do we introduce ethics into a course, right? To me, it has to infuse the entire course from the beginning, right? Thinking about societal impacts and then moving into specific ethical situations and talking about the fundamentals of ethics and responsibilities. And then how do we assess this, right? Assess ethical understanding, right? Doing case studies, discussions and debates, and then doing a more in-depth ethical analysis on a current topic and doing an ethical component of the project. Okay, thank you. That is my part of the bias and ethics discussion today. I'm happy to take questions now, but I'll also hand it over to Edgar. So if anyone has a quick question now, I'll take it. Otherwise, we're going to have a more extensive Q&A at the end.
Hey, I'm going to put up my presentation. Thank you, Raj. That was great. And it also was a great segue into what I want to talk about. I teach a graduate course here at Hunter College, and it's a graduate course for teachers who want to get certified to become K through 12 computer science teachers. It's CSCI 778, Ethics in Computer Science. I'm going to talk a little bit about teaching about ethics and algorithms, and then focus back in specifically on AI at the end. And so when you hear a course like this, you might be saying, well, a course on ethics and algorithms and computer science, that must be just dealing with the infamous issues. You may have heard of the trolley problem. A runaway trolley is on a track. It's about to strike a group of people. Is it ethical for someone to pull a switch to move the trolley onto a side track, thus avoiding killing the five people, but actively affirming that you want to kill somebody else? It's a really hard issue to think about because someone in this problem will get hurt. And in fact, there is a modern trolley issue, and that's, of course, the self-driving car. Is an autonomous driving car is put into an unescapable crash situation. Uh, it's going to choose, is it going to hurt the driver? Is the passenger going to be protected? Are the pedestrians going to be protected? And I always ask folks, well, would someone even buy a car where the choice might be to harm the driver? Would a company even manufacture a car with legal liability like this? And by the way, there's a great study that MIT Technology Review writes about that you can go read about people's perceptions here. But I want to get away from those big issues. Those big issues are absolutely important, but I ask the question of how many of our future programmers will be designing autonomous vehicles and be tackling this very infamous problem. In fact, the problems that they'll be tackling probably look more like this. Validate this user input. Ensure what's in this box appears to be a name. And now you might be saying, wait a second, that's an incredibly boring example. How can an ethical debate result from such a simple program? I'll get back to that in 1 second, but I want to share with you something that's very interesting. New York State Education Department has some rigorous standards for our K through 12 teachers who are getting certified to teach computer science. And among those things are that they want the teachers to demonstrate understanding of the impacts of computing technology on individuals and society, and they want to demonstrate understanding of ways computer systems are used in human decision making, including how those systems might promote inclusivity or introduce bias. So these are things that we want our K through 12 teachers to be able to teach to the next generation of students graduating and the next generation of future programmers. So back to my example about the names. In this computer science course, I teach about regular expressions. That's just a fancy computer science thing for a pattern that can match some kind of input and validate it. So I have the students learn about regex, regular expressions, and then immediately after I say, okay, write a program that takes in some input that someone has typed in and tells me whether that's a valid name. And they go off, they write their programs, and when they come back, it was a setup for an ethical dilemma. The question is, have you told a human being that their name is not valid? Are you being inclusive in the program that you've designed here? It might be something like a hyphenated name, but it might be something like letters of the alphabet that are other than the ones used in the English language. For example, to a computer, the letter E and the letter E with an accent are two different letters. The computer doesn't see those two as exactly the same. And so if you did type an E with an accent into a program that did not recognize it, you are suddenly telling a person that their name is not valid. And so it is smaller exercises like this that we find to be very important, because it is more likely that these small issues that we don't often think about are more common in software development and in programming in general. And so the course is this beautiful mix of learning the Python language, but also engaging in the ethics of algorithm design. And some of those ethical debates are over code and some are not. But in general, I want to shrink the sphere of the stuff out here that you didn't even think about, what you didn't know that you didn't know about how an algorithm might impact humans and might impact society. Of course, I want to give due credit to my predecessor, Mike Zemansky, who's the former distinguished lecturer and program director of computer science ed. He is the person who designed this course, and also he gave me the course example for the ethical regular expressions. So here's another debate we engaged in. I had a group of students develop a video debating the topic of, is it ethical to use ad blockers? And then in the class that happened after they had that debate, I taught a subsequent lesson on, well, when you type something into a web browser, how is a domain found? What is a DNS server that looks up a name, translates it from hunter.cuny.edu into a series of numbers so we can get to the website? And then they looked at a Python program that did this, and then a Python program that used an ad blocking server so that they can start to see, hey, right, when I try to load something from this ad serving server, it's blocked. I can't get it. So what are they learning? They're learning all of the computer science concepts we want them to have, including some of competency 3 from the state, but they're not just learning it in a vacuum. Everything that they're learning is connected back to impact on a real stakeholder. How does this affect the content creators? How does this affect the user of the computer? And we're able to write this program, but should we? Is it ethical to do so? I like to have a little bit of fun in this course, so I like to bring fine American cinematography into my course. And of course, by that I mean RoboCop. As you may know from the movie RoboCop, RoboCop is a police robot designed by Omni Consumer Products. And at some point during the movie, RoboCop realizes that an executive of OCP has committed crimes and goes to the OCP headquarters to arrest that individual. As RoboCop attempts to make the arrest, you see that a prime directive comes up, directive number 4, any attempt to arrest a senior officer of OCP results in shutdown. Now, you might be saying, oh, well, that's really silly. Why is he talking about RoboCop? But the notion that a company can design an algorithm and that algorithm can only be set up to protect that company, or what the guardrails should be on artificial intelligence, is an important discussion for us to have. And by bringing in something silly and fun like RoboCop, you start to make this discussion accessible to your students, and for the future teachers, to their students. And the truth is, this is not such a silly topic, because just last month, Governor Gavin Newsom in California, for a variety of reasons, decided to veto a major AI bill. And as part of that AI bill, it would have mandated a kill switch to turn off AI systems in case of potential biowarfare, mass casualties, or property damage. So this is really a life imitating art. These kinds of examples are important for our students and their students to talk about. And so the core of the course, as Raj alluded to before, are these wonderful ethical debate videos. I give students some prompts every week, and the different groups tackle different parts of that prompt. And they have to either agree that a practice is unethical and present solutions to ameliorate that problem, or they disagree on whether the practice is or is not ethical, and then they're going to go and debate the boundaries. And what I love about this assignment is the students produce the video in a group 1 week, and then in the next week, the other students in the class are viewing each other's videos and they're commenting on it. So they are getting all of the same knowledge, and they are also joining in on that ethical debate. Included in this is that the video has to start off with a mini lesson on the background. So they can't just talk about ad blockers, they have to engage in talking about the technology and algorithms behind the ad blocker before they can then get into the debate on whether that's ethical. So again, they're learning computer science, but they're not doing so in a vacuum. They are relating it to the stakeholders, the ethics, and society in general. So here's an example of one of the prompts. One of the weeks, the video prompt was, there is often a trade-off between privacy and other competing interests. Which of these practices are ethical? And actually, one of the examples is exactly the one that Raj had mentioned earlier. I asked one of the groups to tackle the issue of, is it ethical to break encryption for law enforcement services? And is it ethical to resist doing so? Because there was recently a New York Times article about how some engineers might resist actually trying to break encryption for various reasons. Is preemptive corporate-led content policing ethical? So for example, when you upload stuff to your cloud account, the company who runs the cloud account might be scanning that content to see if there's anything that they consider nefarious in there. And there was a recent issue where someone had snapped a picture of their child, hoping to send that picture to a doctor for a medical diagnosis, but the cloud providers flagged it as child pornography, and there was an entire issue that ensued from that interaction. So is that ethical? Is it ethical for us to be doing preemptive content policing? And then the last one, is it ethical to pay ransom for data that has been taken by a hacking group? And on one end, you might say, no, stop paying the ransom, because every time you pay ransom, that encourages people to go grab more data because they know that there's a guarantee of a payoff. Of course, on the other end, you take an article where hackers are threatening Planned Parenthood in Montana with the release of private information, and you say to yourself, wait a second, people's lives may actually be harmed in this process here. We need to take that into consideration. And so these are wonderful debates that the students are having, and they're very rich and they're very tied to a common topic of how much do we value this privacy. Having said that, rather than us just keep talking at you, we wanted to turn this on you and put you into breakout rooms for you to be able to have your own debate. So let me set up the debate question, and I think it's a debate question that's very meaty and very timely. You may have seen that California just passed a law about this topic. But the question is for you to debate with your peers, when is it acceptable to use artificial intelligence to recreate a human likeness? Are there boundaries that we should be enforcing? But before I put you in the breakout rooms, let me give you some things to think about, some catalysts for your discussion. So here's one thought. There was somebody who decided to recreate George Washington with artificial intelligence. So now you can watch the historic character George Washington talk because he has been reanimated by artificial intelligence. Then there's an article in Wired about the American Civil Liberties Union, who has said, wait a second, we have a constitutional First Amendment right to free speech. So we want to protect your ability to make deep fakes and replicas of human likenesses. There was an article in the Hollywood Reporter that George Carlin's estate sued the creators of an AI generated comedy. This group of folks said, hey, George Carlin passed a few years ago. Let's train an AI on previous George Carlin comedies so that we can see what George Carlin might say to modern issues right now that we're facing that he didn't get a chance to comment on after his passing. And then the last one, oh, Tom Hanks. A likeness of Tom Hanks may have been used in a dental ad, and it wasn't Tom Hanks, and it wasn't authorized by Tom Hanks. All right, so those are your catalysts. And the question to you again is, when is it acceptable to use artificial intelligence to recreate a likeness? What boundaries do you think that we should all agree to enforce? And as you're having your discussion with your peers, consider the four scenarios and anything else you can think of in that discussion. How does this affect historical figures? And how does this affect free speech? Should we be allowing for new perspectives spoken in someone's style? And should there be some limits or some freedom on commercial speech? And with that, I'm going to stop sharing and open up the breakout rooms.